Hi everyone, in this episode we're going to be installing what will be the exterior insulation for the roof. So check out how we do it. So finally spring is here, and from lessons from the past we need to start making progress on this roof as soon as possible. The worst thing that can happen is to get winter here again in like 5-6 months. On the sad side is that we actually get showers in the afternoon, so we gotta make a little bit of progress. We typically have the morning before lunch nice, so we're going to be making nice progress in the morning, and then we're going to dedicate the afternoon for something else. One of the first things we're doing, you might see all these little dots everywhere. We're applying a big stretch to all the nail heads. We do this mainly for two reasons. Maybe one of them has a leak, but more importantly we want to prevent them from getting rusted. And with that said, we have also installed all the extensions for all the skylight. These extensions are going to be basically nailers for our second deck. Let's make a little bit more progress and you'll see how we do this. Check this out, we are basically done with all of the extensions, at least on the angled roof. You can see here on the south side it is 100% complete. We have a couple extensions to install still here down on the north side, and the problem is we ran out of screws. But anyway, let me show you here real quick what we're doing. I think I mentioned it, but I'll mention it again. So here we have the 2x6s that we're ripping to size. These don't have to be pretty. They just need to be basically nailers for the sheathing. One thing that we're doing down here, I mentioned it before, is anything that has to do with the way things look. We are installing LSLs so that it looks perfectly nice and straight. So that's what we're doing for all of the perimeter. And then finally, this is kind of important. This roof overhangs 2 feet, so there's no point in insulating everything all the way to the 2 feet. So we're adding actually a piece of blocking here in between the joists, and this blocking is actually flush up here, but it has a little gap down here. So what that's doing is we're going to be filling all of this with insulation, and then if we get any water to come in here for whatever reason, it can drain down here and basically evaporate and distribute between all these different cavities. Now let's come up here. I mentioned that I think at the beginning that we were going to be installing the extensions perpendicular to the roof, and so here you can see it. We're going to be filling this with insulation. It should make it really nice because our sheathing will come in here like this, and it should be perfectly fine. We ran out of screws, so that's why we haven't installed this. But what I wanted to show you is this gray ice and water shield that we actually ended up installing. We've had this roof assembled for some time, and we've always had issues with this transition between the angled and the flat roof with leaks and whatever. They're very little, but we still have the leaks. So I wanted to go overkill and install this ice and water shield to make sure 100% that we didn't have any leaks in this transition. So that's what you see right here. Once we installed it, we ended up putting the extensions. We have basically covered the south side of the roof with this Polyiso insulation. Before we cover it, I want to mention a few things. So you might notice that we're using the 2x rib that are made out of wood. In a previous episode where we worked on the shed, we experimented with the use of C-girts, and ideally we would have used C-girts on the roof. What we found out is that they were a little bit bouncy. I actually spoke to them and they said, oh, you could put them at 12-inch on center, but if we did that, it would be so expensive. So I think it's just better. This is a nice balance of doing the 2xs rather than the C-girts. Next, you might notice that we have this first layer of Polyiso, but our second layer is going to be made out of mineral wool, Powerwool. The reason we're doing that is because we actually had the engineer here on site at some point and he said the mineral wool is too heavy, we didn't design it for that weight, so what we're going to be doing, the Polyiso is super light, by the way. We're going to be putting our exterior layer everywhere of mineral wool, and then the Polyiso inside, and then that way we can reduce all the weight. And this applies to the inside. We'll use mostly Polyiso, and then our protective layers against fire will be mineral wool. Building science requires a lot of thinking, so we need to make sure that we meet everything to make sure that the energy efficiency inside of the house is top-notch. So because of that, let me explain you a little bit of the 3 different methods of heat transfer. First off, we have conduction. So imagine you have a pot of water, you put a metal spoon, it heats up, and so basically heat transfers through touch. And the reason we use insulation, that's effectively the purpose of the foam or the mineral wool, is to prevent that touch transfer of heat. Next, we have radiation, and that's the sun. For example, right here, it's hitting me in the face. That's wireless heat transfer, if you will. So that's why you see right here this insulation, this Polyiso has the shiny stuff to effectively bounce back the radiation. Now, we're going to be putting mineral wool here, but one thing to know about radiation is that not all radiation is the same. So for example, Wi-Fi, radio waves, light, they are all methods of radiation, and some materials are effectively transparent to some radiation. So the mineral wool will have it, but it could be transparent to some method of radiation, so it could go through it and then effectively bounce off of this mirrory surface. So that is the method of heat transfer for radiation. Now finally, we have convection, and it doesn't necessarily apply to the insulation itself. That applies to the air sealing of the house. So imagine you have a balloon, it catches up on a column of heat, and that's what rises, and then the cold and the warm air mix together. And this is mostly on fluids, right? So when you have a warm house and you have a leak, then you have that hot air escaping and mixing with the cold air, and that's how you lose your heat. So that is convection. We're super excited to have this big mountain behind me, and this big mountain behind me is from our friends from Powerwool. It's a Rigiboard 80, and it's a mineral wool. We had such a terrible experience with Rockwool. I don't get why they advertise so much if they can't deliver. So anyway, the story with Rockwool is we placed an order. They said, oh yeah, we'll get you your Rockwool in a month. Then one month went by, 2 months, 3 months. After 3 months, I started calling them. They would ignore my calls. They would ignore my emails. They would ignore everything. And we actually paid completely in full. It was a big order. It was like the price of a small car, completely paid in full. 9 months went by. They didn't deliver. We finally called the supplier, and we said, you know what, we gotta cancel this stuff. They're never gonna deliver. And we ended up replacing that order with Polyiso. And so that's why you see us having the dual layer of first Polyiso and then mineral wool. Even then, we weren't sure we would be able to finish the entire house because we had a little bit of Rockwool available. I actually do like that assembly a lot better because Polyiso has an R value of 7 per inch, I think, while mineral wool has an R value of 4.2. So it's much more resistant to thermal transfer and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, going back to Rockwool, the problem with Rockwool is they have these allocations with different companies, and then we place the allocation on this guy. They told me, okay, order here, we have allocation, didn't deliver. We have allocation here, we have allocation here, allocation here. I don't care, just give me my material. I don't care about your allocations. Anyway, so that was a terrible experience. We gave up on mineral wool almost. We said, no, we're never gonna get it. And then we went to IBS and we found our friends from Powerwool, which is amazing. We're super excited. The name of the board of this insulation is Rigiboard. It's equivalent, Rigiboard 80. It's equivalent to Comfort Board 80. And we placed the order. They delivered in a month. They were very straightforward. They were always on top of it. To be honest, it's amazing. I spoke to the guy. You should talk to Scotty. They have supply centers here in the East Coast and the West Coast. So if you want to order this, it should be available. But anyway, we're not sponsored. We're just super excited at the fact that we were able to get it. And that said, talking about the product itself, to be honest, I actually think Powerwool is better than Rockwool. This is a lot more solid. It feels more carton-like, which makes it really easy to cut. It makes for better assembly on the exterior. So see here, I can squish it, and it does squish, but not that much. Here I have a piece of Rockwool, which is also good material. The quality of the material is good. That's not a complaint. But this is a bit more squishy than Powerwool. So to be honest, I actually like this material much better. So with that out of the way, we can install this insulation. We basically finished all of the framing right here, and one important detail that you can see right here is when we framed this flat roof, unfortunately we did not frame it correctly. We framed it flat, and actually I think it was a little bit slanted to the inside, and we wanted to frame it with a 1/4 inch per foot. And anyway, long story short, that's what we're doing right here. That's why you see all these little shims, so that we can actually frame at the right height, so that water, when we get snow and all that stuff, actually drains out. And that's what you see right here. We have all these fasteners right here. We're going to be applying through the roof just to make sure that there are no leaks or whatever. We want to make this first roof watertight, and then when we put the second roof or the second deck, it hopefully will be also watertight.
What I have here is one of the penetrations for the radon system. By code, the radon needs to go out through the roof. You cannot do it out through a wall. And the radon fan needs to be outside of the building envelope. So in our case, it has to be out here, because if you have an attic, as long as it's not part of the building envelope, you can put it inside. But in our case, everything is conditioned space. So it has to be outside. And here we notice something very important. So you're going to put the fan and it needs power. We forgot to drill a hole for the power. So now we have to install a conduit and do all of that. So that's what we're going to do now. In this roof, we only have 2 penetrations. One is for this radon system and the other one is for the radon on the other side of the house.
Before we start doing any kind of sheeting, it's very important that we install this Subfascia zip sheeting. So it kind of serves 2 purposes. The first purpose is obviously it makes it look nice. It's gonna get covered, so it doesn't really matter. But also a second reason why we install it, and I think the reason why we will install it into the future, regardless of whether we have exterior insulation or not, is because it will actually protect the subfascia that's not meant to be exposed as long. So you can see how this is deteriorating because of the water and whatnot. So I highly recommend installing this. It takes a little bit of more work, but also it kind of guarantees that you have a nice and straight roof line. That said, we were not perfect. We didn't even think about it when we were installing the roof. So if you come down here, you might see this little detail right here. So back there, we are fully continuous. You might see the roof line coming down, but down here we have a little jump. And so what that means is that we're going to have to shim this so that it perfectly lines up with the zip sheeting. Back there, you might also notice that it's not perfectly straight. So that's another reason why we use the zip sheeting, because it helps us make it look nice. Check this out, we are fully done with the sheathing and all the taping and whatnot. We're super excited because this has been a lot of work. It's taken a few weeks actually. But before we close out this episode, very important related to taping. This is one of the last tapes we'll be applying zip tape basically in this house anywhere. First off, it's very important that when you apply zip tape, you apply it shingle style. We also, from the previous experience, is when you have a transition between a flat roof and an angled roof, that transition is extremely risky for water. So we're going belts and suspenders, we're applying through the roof, liquid flash, everything. We cannot have a leak at all. Next, we actually, remember how we said we forgot about drilling a hole for the electrical on the radon? Well, it turns out we forgot to drill a hole for the solar power, so we will be doing that, and we'll no need to show you, it's just applying stretch tape and whatnot. So it's awesome to have this exterior insulation. By the way, one thing that you notice right away when you have exterior insulation on the roof is the temperature change inside the house. Right now we're in summer, July, and it gets really hot outside, and it's like, I don't know, 90 degrees, 100 degrees outside, and then on the inside is maybe like 80 degrees, and that's just from the roof insulation. So I highly recommend it if you don't do anything else. With that said, we're still working on this. You can see that we are applying the skylight frames. One thing about skylights though is if you use Velux skylights, you need to make sure that you make the frame the right size. It needs to be slightly smaller than the size of the skylight because you need to apply flashing and all that stuff. We made that mistake on the shed, so we're not making that mistakes right here. So anyway, I hope you liked this episode. I hope you learned something, and we'll see you on the next one. And one last thing I forgot to mention, we're going to be applying through the roof on every single nail penetration up there. We cannot have any water leakage. So you can check out this time lapse as to how we finish it off.